this video, I'd like to speak about the Islam and the 5 big questions of life. Islam and the 5 big questions of life. The Quran, for Muslims being the final revelation from God to humanity, it contains within it legal guidance and instruction, spiritual and ethical guidance and instruction. It even touches upon historical narratives and stories, parables. There's even some smidging of natural science in there as well. But by and large and overall, the Quran is more than the sum of its parts. It's a book of guidance. It's a roadmap for life, helping to get humanity from the here and now to ultimately the hereafter, to the presence of God. And as such, you'd expect that such a book will tackle the 5 big questions of life, questions which prophets and philosophers, saints and sages, and just the ordinary person has been mulling over and sometimes even agonizing about throughout the centuries, throughout, from the dawn of humanity, so to speak. So what are those 5 big questions of life? Well, they are the cosmological question. That's to do with how did this all come about? The epistemological question of how do we know what we know? The ontological question, which concerns itself with the nature of being, of who we are. The teleological question, what's our purpose, what's our ultimate reason for being here? And finally, the eschatological question, where are we all ultimately heading, or where is all of this going? So let's look at each of those questions very briefly. The first one, the cosmological question, where did this all come from? The Quran, as with the other 4 questions, it gives us clear-cut answers and provides humanity with a deeply satisfying answer to these great questions of life. So the Quran states, وَلَئِن سَأَلْتُم مَّنْ خَلَقَ السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ لَيَقُولُنَّ اللَّهُ. If you ask them who created the heavens and the earth, they will say God. Now, no doubt, science, and in particular cosmology, has given us the mechanisms by which the universe was birthed or started through the Big Bang. And some people quite mistakenly think that merely because we know the mechanism of how the universe evolved 13.5 billion years ago from this infinitesimally small point called the Big Bang, and it exploded and everything expanded, cooled down and clustered into stars and galaxies, more or less how we see the universe today, merely because we know the mechanism of how the universe came about, it does not necessarily imply that there was no agent behind it. To believe that merely because we know the mechanism behind something, there is no agent behind it, is a logical fallacy. It's a bit like saying, merely because I know the workings of an iPhone, the detailed workings of an iPhone, and the mechanism of how an iPhone came to be or came about, then that there is no Steve Jobs who is the agent behind the iPhone. No. One doesn't naturally or necessarily follow on from the other, even though today most people confuse the two. They think that science has adequately given us the mechanism, therefore there is no agent. That's just not the thinking man or the thinking woman's response. That's just uncritical, blind acceptance of just kind of popular philosophy, popular culture. And it's unfortunate because we moderns, we think of ourselves as rational creatures, and yet so many times, especially on big questions, there isn't much rationality there. There is perhaps more blind following than there is critical thinking. But the Quran impresses upon us to think, to reflect, to question, to ponder and meditate. And this is what the Quran urges in this case, that how did this all come about? From God. Of course, some say, okay, well, look, some will say that this all came about through the Big Bang, but then the question would also be, who put the Big Bang there, or how did the Big Bang get to where it was? So it's really not the Big Bang is not an end explanation. It might be an explanation for part of the process, but not the ultimate explanation. Some people will say, well, fine, it's not an ultimate explanation. The Big Bang came from a multiverse. There are multiple universes, or there are an infinite number of universes, and our universe just bubbled off from an existing universe. Well, that's not very helpful as well, because all that does is throw the question back a little further, in that who or how did the multiverse get there? What was the origin of the multiverse? You have an answer by some scientists today that say, because the idea is like, we don't want to bring God into the equation by hook or by crook. We need to kind of keep God's foot out of the door, so to speak, right? And so people are kind of just like scrambling for any answer that they can sometimes. So one of the answers of how did all of this get there, well, actually it came from nothing, and by nothing they mean quantum physics can tell us that virtual particles can pop in and out of existence just like that. And so our universe, being kind of a quantum event, they say, just popped into existence. Well, that's not quite true in the sense of a quantum event. Although quantum physics has shown that virtual particles do pop into and out of existence just without our being able to explain it currently. But virtual particles are from a quantum vacuum, and a quantum vacuum is not nothing. A quantum vacuum is something. We may use the word vacuum in a very general way to mean emptiness or nothingness, but that's not what a quantum vacuum is. A quantum vacuum is, as physicists will tell us, it's full of, it's teeming with virtual particles. Or a curious response to how this all got here, the late Stephen Hawking, in his last book that he co-authored, tells us that because there is a law of gravity, then that's how the universe got here. But laws of physics themselves don't create things anymore. The law of gravity didn't create the universe any more than Newton's laws of motion move snooker balls or balls on a pool table. No, it's not the laws that create or that move. It's an agent behind it that does the moving. Okay, laws of physics are merely mathematical equations that describe what happened under particular circumstances. So in the end, the Quran's answer that it is God who created all of this is a rational answer. Some will say, though, well, if everything that comes into existence must have a cause for its existence, then what created God? Who created God? And sometimes people feel quite smug that they think they kind of got a victory over the theist, the believer in God, in this argument. But actually, that's not what Muslims say, nor is it what Jews or Christians say. They don't believe God came into existence. Rather, they say everything that came into existence from non-existence, or everything that came into existence after not existing, must have a cause for its existence. And of course, in that sense, God did not come into existence after non-existence. God, glory be to him, has always been. The quality of life, of having life, is intrinsic to the very nature and being of God. God cannot be but living eternally. He has always been and always will be. So that answers that atheistic conundrum, which really has been answered throughout the millennia by Muslim theologians, that God is not someone who came into being such that he needs a cause. So that's the cosmological question and some very brief replies to common atheistic, agnostic objections to that issue.